there's nothing that took away the pride I felt when I got promoted to director. I won't gonna lie, because I worked very hard to get it. Challenges, battles, things, everything you have that makes you is still there. It's a title. I've read somewhere, I think it was Lovey. She posted something on Instagram of like how all job titles are rented anyway. You're just renting them onto the next person. And when I read that, I was just like, that is so true. And it just made me really like, okay. And it started that journey of me not being defined by my job, not being defined by my level, because I think this is another motivator for me in terms of building my personal brand, because I didn't want to be tied to something, because it didn't define, it's one facet of who I am.
Welcome to another episode of Everyday Leadership, and today I have the pleasure of talking to an amazing guest. And normally you hear me introduce my guests, but today I'm like, no, let's switch it up. Let's switch it up. I've got Chichi in the building, and I'm gonna ask her to introduce herself. I know she actually hates me for this, but why not? Let's do something different. Chichi, how are you doing?
I am very well, Sope. Thank you so much for having me on. Thank you for springing this introduction onto me. But who am I? It's such an interesting question, because I think for the past year I've spent a lot of time decoupling my identity from my job title. So who am I? I'm Chichi. I'm a wife. I'm a mom. I've got 2 great kids. I'm happily married. I am a leadership coach. I am a creator. I'm a creative. I'm very much passionate about making things and building things. I really love helping others to discover the gifts that they have inside themselves and explore their potential and help them achieve great things. And yeah, I'm in a season of change right now. So that is who I am in a bit of a nutshell. So yeah.
I love that. So it's quite interesting when people do that, because I would have gone with award-winning executive coach, previous head of leadership at Multiverse, been in the game working with HSBC for years, been in different publications that people have heard about, LinkedIn Top Voice. Those are the accolades. But actually what's more important to you is exactly you talking about what you do, the differences that you make in people's lives. And that for me sounds absolutely amazing.
Yeah. It's so interesting, because I've spent a lot of time over my career being or feeling defined by a title. It's very easy when you meet people to, oh, hey, what's your name? What do you do? And that one sentence can either make you feel really excited to be like, yes, I do this, or really like, this, what I do doesn't weigh up or measure up. I remember when I had my daughter and I was on maternity leave, and I'd just left HSBC at the time to go on maternity leave, and I immediately became COB's mum. Like, I lost my name. You go through this major identity crisis of like, so what do you do? You're like, well, I'm on maternity leave. I'm this. So I've learned over the years to kind of always be asking myself, like, who am I? I mean, these are the things that I can, here are my receipts, of course, like, there's no denying that. But when you take all of those things away, like, who am I? And that's who I am. And those are things that matter to me the most.
When you think about identity, it's quite easy for us to lean into organizations, corporates, like you said, being a mother, all that kind of. But let's run it back a bit. What was teenage Chichi like?
Teenage Chichi. So I am the first of 6 children. And as a teenager, I was somebody, if you talk to my parents, in fact, my dad always shares a story. When I was 5, he found me kind of like in a sea of newspapers, just kind of like had them all over, spread over the living room. And he was just like, what are you doing? And I was like, I'm looking for common sense. Because he told me, like, he had said something about like, oh, you need to have common sense. And I was like, looking for common sense. So I've always been this very curious child. I've always been this person who likes to research and read. And like, my favorite things at home as a child was like, I had Encarta, like, this is back before Google, like the full collection of Encarta. That was my happy place. The library was my happy place, because it's just like access to knowledge and information. So as a teenager, I was someone I was very focused. As the eldest, we didn't have a lot of money. We were working class. My parents were working really hard. And I knew that, one, as a first generation immigrant, university was the next calling card. So it's like all the stuff to get you there. Two, I also knew because finances were tight. As soon as I turned 16, I was like, let me go and get myself a job. And I remember having like 2 jobs at the time. And so on Saturdays, I'd go and work at like this clothing shop from morning to like 6. And then I'd run across Manchester to Pizza Hut and then do like 7 till midnight. But I was like, I can do it. I'm going to do it. So there was that. And then as the eldest, I always heard like, you're the eldest, you got to set a good example. So I was never the party good. I was just like very much like, I have a goal and I need to do that. So I was very focused on how can I just learn new stuff. My dad at the time had his own business, and so I'd spend my summers there. So that's where I learned how to like use computers and design stuff and all that sort of things. Because I just like learning skills and I like to do all that. So that was always me. I was quite entrepreneurial. So I'd go with my mum to like the cash and carry and get like loads of chocolate sweets and crisps and sell them to my siblings for a profit, because I was like, well, why not? To my siblings. Because they can't go out and get stuff, so like come and get them for me. I will, I'll happily oblige. So that was me as a child. As a teenager, I loved learning. I loved school. I was one of those people who, I remember getting a detention for like the first time ever. What did I get it for? I think either talking or homework was late or something that's just not in my nature, and I was devastated. I was like, my record, so whatever. But I love school, and I love having teachers who were able to see that in me, nurture that in me. So I was very focused, like I need to do well in school because I need to get to university so I can get a good job. That was always the plan. So yeah, that was me.
For those who don't know what Encarta is, it's like, think Google but in books. Like that's what you have to manually go through loads and loads. It has some great pictures to it. But yeah, as a young gun's thinking, what the hell's an Encarta again? That's what it is. Okay. So you've always been that entrepreneur, curious child. And when you talked about the progression was go to university, was that any doubt, not even doubt, what should I say, any delineation in your mind that, I can do something differently? Or was it always, no, that's the route, that's what's set in front of me, that's what I'm going to do?
That was always the route. My parents were teachers, and at the time, there wasn't any other options. So it's not like today where you can go and do an apprenticeship. You can go and like not go to university. You can, do something else. At the time, and it makes me feel really old, but like that was the option. That was what everybody was doing, and it felt the very most natural thing to do. But I also knew for me, it was the last thing, I said to myself, it's the last thing I'm doing for my parents. Not in a kind of like mean way, but like this is my last obligation to them. They've come into the UK, they've built their lives here. My last gift to them is like, I'll go to university and I'll go to a good university and I'll get a good grade. But after that, it's time for me to like do the thing that I want to do. So yeah, that was always that focus. Because if I think about it, there wasn't no other thing to do. It's like, if you didn't go to university, then they'd be like, well, what are you doing in your life? So it was like, go to university. And the question was like, not if, but like, where are you planning to go? And like working towards that. So yeah.
I didn't know you grew up in Manchester.
I did. I'm a Mancunian. The accent comes out sometimes when I'm tired.
Okay, because I've never heard the accent before. So I'm like, wait a minute, why you from Manchester? Okay.
Over with my family, the Manchester accent comes out strong, but it's become refined over the years. When did I move down to 20s? Yeah, so probably like I've spent half my life down south or half my life up north. So yeah.
And then went into finance, and the fact, well, when I was reading, I actually know this, but I started laughing because I did economics at uni. So I went down the finance route. The whole we did the same thing, man. We can do the kid yourself from day up before you actually start moving into another different area of your life. But even at that point in time when you were doing and studying finance, I'm curious, why did you choose finance? I know the reasons I had, because mine was very much like I wanted to have a broad approach to life. And finance was the one thing that had that. So I'm serious, was that similar to you, or was there a particular reason you looked for finance?
Yeah, good question. So I knew I didn't want to be a doctor. Just no way. Because when they present all the options, like doctor, lawyer, just felt too long. Engineering, wasn't even interested in that. Funnily, I wanted to be an accountant. Now, if you know me, that's the most randomest thing. But like, with going into university, that was the mindset. I wanted to do accountancy. And my course was business finance. the very first, so accountancy modules on Monday mornings. And so after doing that for like a semester, I was like, yeah, I don't think I want to do accounting. I don't really enjoy this that much. But I knew I wanted to work in finance because like I said, I was always a researcher and I was looking, okay, what careers could I go down? How could I leverage the things that I'm interested in? So having seen my dad build his business, I was like, okay, finance, business, I'm interested in that. At school, I loved business studies and I loved economics. I loved learning how the economy worked. I loved learning about, at that time, this is when we were about to enter, I think the euro was coming out and all sorts of stuff. So I loved seeing all the macro and micro economics of life. And so that's what kind of was the thing that made me want to go into that. And then I also knew that if I want to get a good job, then I need to join a graduate program. And all the graduate programs I was looking at were like banks. So initially I was like, investment banking, this looks too hard for me. Like I'm a smart person, but I wouldn't say like maths and all of that sort of stuff is something that I have to work really hard for those things to really click with me. And I just looked at that, I was like, no. So I went into banking, but I went to more like commercial finance. So when I joined HSBC, I was in their commercial banking program where you're working with the high street. So like the business clients that you see on the high street, not the big corporates and that sort of thing. I was like, I really enjoy that. I understand that. And that's what I did. So yeah, it came from that stem of like, I like how the economy works and that's interesting to me. But then when I went into the course, the nuance of being an accountant was just boring. And I was like, no, I don't want to do that. So that's what prompted me. And then when I went into working in HSBC, again, I loved, this is how you kind of start to get kind of clues around what you enjoy. I really enjoyed, so I had what we call a portfolio. I had about 200 small business customers that I was looking after in Manchester. And as their bank manager, I'd go and see them and like, how you doing, Mr. Smith? Like, tell me about your business, what are your plans, what's all this and everything. And I loved those. I loved walking up and down the high street and these are my customers. I look after them, that sort of thing. And then I get back to the office and it's like, oh, and how many business credit cards did you sell? And how many did it? And I'm like, well, I didn't sell a business credit card because he didn't need one. But we talked about his like business strategy and I gave him some ideas about how you can do X, Y, Z. But that wasn't like what wasn't valued. So immediately already I realized like I'm not into sales in that sense. And I really like helping people. I'm able to sort of see and solve problems. And I think this problem solving mindset was something that became really hyper aware for me. Like, oh yeah, I'm really good at solving problems. So that's what I enjoyed most about that role. So
that's brilliant though. I think that speaks to, I think a lot of times people are like, oh, what do I do next? Or I don't have clarity. And there are times where it's like, well, go and do something or go and do their thing. Because actually in that, you discover a lot about yourself. Like you were able to discover that, yeah, I don't want to sell the credit cards to people that don't need it, but I know what it is I enjoy. I know what path I want to lean into next. And that's where that kind of unravels, rather than trying to think through things for yourself or in your head, which never goes anywhere. You just end up going around in circles and wasting so much energy.
I knew I had the plan, like I had the plan to get to university, get a graduate job. That was the ultimate goal. Beyond that, I didn't know where my career would go. I firmly at that time thought, yeah, finance is for me. That's what I want to go and do. So I followed that pathway. I did all the internships. I did all the things that you need to do so you can get yourself a good graduate job. So I was one of those fortunate people going into third year with a job offer. So I was like, great, I can just put my head down and focus on my final year. But beyond that, and this is why I always say to people now, it's sort of, we have all these degrees and everything, and it's what's the word now? That's all you need to get your first job. The goal is to get your first job. Once you're in your first job, nobody ever asked me where did I go to university. Nobody ever asked me what degree I did. Nobody cared. They were like, okay, show me what you've done. Show me what you can do. So that's the thing. I was like, I need to just get to that final destination of like, I'm in an organization that's great. And then I can like get control of my career that way. And I've always loved HSBC. I don't know what it was about them. I just loved them as an organization. I loved they were international. It was my bank, is my very first bank. So I think that's weird loyalty. I was like, I'd love to work for HSBC. I got my first mortgage from there when I was like 22. So like, I have a lot of loyalty to that bank. But yeah, so I was really pleased to work there.
Did you ever start to think at that point in time when you're working with so many other businesses, you wanted to create your own thing?
Not in the early stages, but when I became pregnant, and I was like thinking about this realistically of like, how am I going to be commuting into London 5 days a week and with a baby and all that sort of thing. And at that point at HSBC, I'd moved into different roles and I'd moved from the north to the south. I was in head office now. And I enjoyed what I did, but I didn't love it. So at the time, I had just worked on Apple Pay as a project. So I was in the team's called UK Transformation. It's a team that does all the projects internally and externally for HSBC. So I'd done Apple Pay. That was such a fun project, working with Apple, that sort of thing. And I was responsible for the marketing work stream. That was when I was like, oh, I like marketing. Like, so that thing that I was doing with those small business customers was marketing. I was actually helping them to market their business. I didn't know what it was called at the time. And then it was like, okay, how would I get myself into marketing? I looked at the route internally and I was like, this is too convoluted. So when I got pregnant, I was going on maternity leave. I was like, I'm just going to figure this thing out myself. And went on maternity leave. And I was like, okay, I have kind of a year to like try different things. That's when I started my very first business. I mean, I trained as, I discovered this thing called virtual assisting. I became a virtual assistant, first of all. I was like, okay, let me just like see what, I could do this from home, got internet. So I was doing that, and I started working with some small businesses, doing their marketing, creating like templates for like Instagram, Facebook, all that sort of thing, email marketing. And then at the same time, I also trained as a childminder. So this is me. I'm like, I go all in on these things. I'm like, okay, what can I do that will keep me at home? So I was like, okay, if I'm a childminder, I can look after my own daughter. And then I didn't want to look after other babies. I was like, if I do like the pre-school, before school and after school shift, then I have the day with my daughter, and then like in the morning, they'll drop the kids. So I had like these 2 little boys who would get dropped off at like 7 o'clock. I'll give them breakfast, I'll look after them, then I'll take them to school, have the day with my daughter, 3 o'clock, go and pick them up. So that's what I did for like 6-9 months. So that was like my first foray into like entrepreneurship. And I was like, I've got this little business here, and then I've got like this virtual assisting thing, which kind of grew into sort of doing websites and more strategy stuff, and then like transitioned into sort of coaching. But that's how it all started. And you just learn the hard way around like getting customers. Who is my ideal customer? How much should I charge? I remember like one Christmas time I'd done this like offer where I was creating like these meme templates for clients. And I remember like it was Christmas Eve. I was creating so many of these things. I was like, I didn't charge enough for this. This is just not a good use of my time or money. And that's when that was my first thing into like, you need to price your time properly. So like you just learn the hard ways. But I loved it. I loved the fact that I could be in my house. I had internet. I could earn money from my house, my laptop. I was just like, this is amazing. Like, how do I do it more? So that was 2012. Like 2012, yeah, 2012.
That's got a different mindset though, because some people will be like, yo, I've just got a kid. That's a full-time job in itself, looking after your child. Let alone thinking, what other side hustles can I take on? What else can I learn to then help me to generate more income? So there's something around there where I'm like, just skip over that. Like, what is that? Where does that drive come from to be able to think differently, to be able to think outside the box, to think about, all right, let me learn that so I can do this, and because I want to stay at home?
It's a good question. I think it's just where my mind works. I was like, okay, I don't want to go back to HSBC because it's just going to be really hard with a baby. And to be fair, I'm not really enjoying it anyway, and I don't want to still sort of do that same sort of role. I want to move into marketing. And this is where I said my love of reading. I remember I don't even know where I saw it. I saw this book around getting into virtual assisting, and I was like, okay, let me just try it. So, like, I don't mind a level of risk. I don't mind taking risks, because I'm like, well, if it works, great. If it don't work, then okay, fine, I learned something. So for me, I was just, okay, this child, I don't know, because it's mad when I think about it. It's like, I literally had given birth to my daughter, and she's like 4 or 5 days old, and my mother-in-law, my husband were watching her while I went to like the local council for like their introduction to childminding course, like this hour course thing. It was just mad. But that was just me. So I just, because I knew there was a bigger picture, there was a bigger plan. I was like, if I get this, then I can, it's a really great way for me to stay at home and earn money. And then I also knew at that time, like with babies when they're really young, a lot of the time they're going to be sleeping anyway. And me, I just like to just keep my mind going. So that was for me. I wasn't one of those moms who would go to the parent and toddler groups and just hang out there. I just didn't. I went to a couple and I was like, nah, it's not me. Even to this day, like I'll do some stuff, but I'm just not that parent. I'm the parent who will go up to on the playground with headphones in, listen to a podcast, wait for my son, and then go. And I know it's not brilliant, but like that's the way. I'll make an effort sometimes, but I wasn't about to spend like a year. It's that whole thing, like similar to what we were talking about before. In this season, even now, fine, I'm on sabbatical, but I'm like, what do I want to be learning? What books do I actually want to read? How do I want to use this time to develop my mind? So I'm like looking at different things, and it's like those are things that will keep me stimulated while I rest, because that is like rest for me. It's weird, but that's, do you know what I mean? So that's how I just think.
What's the difference between loving and enjoying?
In what context?
Because earlier you mentioned that I was no longer loving work, I was just enjoying it. And I'm curious, how do you know the difference between one and the other one?
I think it depends on different things. So at that moment in time, I enjoy the organization I work for. Like, I think, HBC were a great company to work for. I wasn't loving the work I was doing because I knew, and I've learnt this over the years, the kind of person I am, I know the kind of things that I like to do. So I'll go and give something a go. But when I start to lose the love, it's because I feel like I'm no longer in my element, meaning I'm no longer doing something that plays to my skills, my strengths. I'm not growing and just feel a little bit stuck. So you're sort of going through the motions. When work starts to feel like that, that's when it's a problem. And I have felt that in all lots of different roles. In the last organization I work with, again, great organization, but you will go through seasons where you're like, this role is no longer aligned anymore. And I can do it, but how long can you just do something and just not feel? Because for me, we spend so much time at work. If you're not growing, if you're not enjoying it, and again, something that makes it enjoyable is colleagues. So again, you could be working with really great people, not really loving the day-to-day, but because you're around great people, that also helps to extend how long you might stay somewhere. So, but ultimately, you'll just take a step back and say, is this doing it for me? So for me, it wasn't anymore. And by that time, culminatively, if I say that word, I spent a lot of time at HBC. I joined as a graduate. I worked my way through and did lots of different jobs. So it's that thing of like, is now the time to go? And often it is. You often know when it's time to like move on to something else.
How did you make that decision then for your own business? Because then you moved into Multiverse, which is brand new, exciting, but also I know you say you're not risk averse and you don't completely lean into the other side of things, but it's still a brand new startup with this new approach. So why did you decide to step into that?
Yeah, when I joined Multiverse, back then it was white hat. So that year, 2018, I was on sabbatical again. So I'd been running my own business for like 5 years. So at this point, I'd left HSBC fully. I was in my business full time. And then 2017, again, it's those things like outwardly, you will kind of, everything looks great and good, but then you realize everything looks great, but then I was burnt out. I was just burnt out. So at that time, I also felt God saying to me, like, you need to stop everything. So I literally stopped everything, had a business, closed everything down, and just went on this like sabbatical, or whatever we call it. Like, I didn't know what the end goal was going to be. I didn't know where I was going to end up, but I knew that I needed to stop. So I spent 2018 in that space. And when my friend towards the end of 18 sent me this link, she's like, I've seen this role, I think you really enjoy it, because at the time it was like coaching and marketing. So it was like a marketing coach. I was like, okay, looks interesting. I Googled, couldn't find anything. At the time, they didn't have a lot of stuff all about them on there. But I was curious because I've run my own business. I felt like it's a nice transition back into the world of work. You're working for a startup, so you still have to have that entrepreneurial mindset, but you're still going to get that steady paycheck. Because even in that 2018 year, I was on sabbatical. Around August, September time, I did a kind of a contract for 3 months. They were like the worst payers. So you do the work, it's time to get paid. You would never see your money. And then it was like the final straw was when it was Christmas. They paid all their employees and pay any of their contractors. And the office is small. The CEO is there, just blank you and just say nothing. I was just like, this is not great. So I thought, okay, well, at least if you're going to work somewhere, there's a stability of the salary, but also it's a brand new startup. There's like 50 people there. You're going to get a chance to bring all those skills that you have. And I thought, it's like a safe environment to do that. And like I said, I was burnt out. I was tired. I was exhausted. And whilst I'd run my business for like 5 years, I was just like, I needed change. But I was also quite low in confidence as well, because I remember saying to my coach at the time, I was like, isn't this like failing? I'm going back to work. Like I failed. And she's like, why would you see it that way? It's like a season. It's a different thing. So that was what drew me. I was like, I'm going to go and do something I enjoy. The two things that I enjoy, coaching, marketing. It's a place where I can really get to grow. And it's that whole thing of like all the different things you've done beforehand will come and help you loads in it. And I found that a lot. You know, running my own business just gives you a different mindset when you're working at a startup. Because startup life is hard, but then if you work for yourself, it's hard. So you just have that level of resilience that you just keep going. You're very resourceful. You're very creative. You're very kind of, you know, you're constantly solving problems. So that transition was quite good. If I'd gone from like sabbatical back into a corporate, I think it would be quite hard because, you know, the last 5 years I've been working for myself, and now I'm like back working with somebody else in that way.
What led to your burnout before you joined? Because you're thinking you're at home, working for yourself, being an entrepreneur is hard. But what created that burnout for you?
Doing too much. So like if I was in business now, when I reflect on that time, did I write so bad in the book? I think I did. You don't know what you don't know when you run a business. And I remember doing this launch to launch this group coaching program, and it was a really successful launch. Like I was really proud of myself. I'd like worked really hard to like sell all the spaces, and it was like this 6-month program, I think it was. And that was the thing that allowed me to be like, yep, HSBC, bye. Like, we're not coming back. But then I didn't realize, and this is what you learn, that like whilst I was busy there delivering this wonderful program, I needed to still be marketing and doing all the other stuff, because this program finished and I was like, oh, I have no clients. Like I haven't got anything. So I went into this kind of panic mode of trying to do all the things. And I spent that kind of 2017 year just like trying to do all the things. I wasn't very focused on my approach to what I was doing. And obviously as a self-employed person, the pressure financially to like manage all of that and do all of that. And at that time, I then had 2 kids. It just was too much. So it got to a point where I was like, this is not working. So there's many things that I would do differently if that time came again. But also there's things that I've just learnt over the years of like, you know, the planning and thinking like, what's the long-term thing you're trying to do here? How are you making sure like you're going to cover everything? How do you make sure things keep moving when you're delivering? All of that, it's just like lessons. But, you know, if I hadn't gone through that experience, then I wouldn't know that now. But that's what contributed to it as well. Because I'd left HSBC, was running my business for a little bit. I had my second child. I actually went back to HSBC for a year. It wasn't even up to a year. It's like 6 months, 7 months. I was like, nope, cannot do this. Because it was like, I'm going to drop 2 kids off at a childminder at like 7 o'clock in the morning to get 7:30. I was like, that didn't last very long. My husband was also working away a lot. So he is a consultant. So he was like flying out on a Sunday night, flying back on a Thursday. So imagine 2 kids, he was just too much. So I just had to stop and reassess life. I was like, what am I going to do now? So yeah. So going back into paid employment was probably the most stable thing for me to do at that point after that time.
But what you mentioned there though was that struggle is real. Even though it's the most stable thing to do, you feeling like, oh my gosh, I feel like a failure, or me going back in, is that a step backwards? That's some of the reasons why we find people sometimes struggling to keep on going with something they know they need to let go of. And I think it's a really, really important point, and knowing that things operate in seasons, in chapters, and be like, this is just for this period. I can transfer those skills into something else. And then down the line, I might have to move into another thing like, here's what it is. That's just life. But we can easily hold on to something like, no, I don't want people to think I'm a failure. And you just end up hurting yourself and those around you.
So true. And I had to learn that because I felt that way 100%. You know, if you think at that time, I was very prominent on Facebook. I had a Facebook group with like almost 4,000 people in. I had a business, everything. I had a podcast. I had just released a book. So to basically then say, guys, killing everything, it was like to the outside, it just like, this does not make sense. So of course, those feelings of like failure were very strong because it's sort of like, oh, I could have made it work if I just hold it a little bit longer, but it was just destroying me. So when I went back to work, to employment in that sense, I had to wrestle those feelings because what's it going to look like? All the different things. And even like I had to stay off social for a while because I was just like, it's too triggering because it was just reminders. And then to see people who were like behind me, kind of surpass me in their own entrepreneurial journey, just felt really like as well. But then again, I agree. It's about seasons. And I very much felt God led me to multiverse to go and be there for 4 years, learn a hell of a lot. I had amazing opportunities there. I grew so much as an individual, and that has made me a much better entrepreneur. Going back into that path when that time is right to go back and do that. So, I genuinely believe that. At the time, it's hard. At the time, we don't sit there with a crystal ball to be like, if someone said to me in 2018, this was going to happen, and you're going to do this, and you're going to get this thing and work upwards first and get these promoted, and come out the other end, of course you'd be like, sure, let's do it. But you don't know those things, and you go into it. And in the middle of that, we have a 2-year pandemic. So you just don't know. So it's really trusting. This is why, my faith is really important. Like, I've heard God clearly say, and you know what God is like? If you don't listen, he'll just find a way to make you stop anyway. So it got to a point where, things that I was doing that I knew had worked in the past just stopped working. And I was like, okay, fine. God, fine. We'll stop. And that was what it is. And that's then. And we just, went with his plan. So, yeah.
So you go from going, listening to God, stopping, dealing with burnout, to a startup, 50 people, which is a highly stressful environment. Together with that pandemic, you go from looking after a team of 2 to 200 people. It don't sound like an easy life for me right now, I'm like, I'm trying to work it out.
Do you know what though? I was talking to somebody about this last week. In some ways, the pandemic served us in lots of different ways. So from a family's perspective, it brought our family together, because back before pandemic, husband and I would leave at 7:30. Nanny would come in. We'd be out the door to go into London. This is when I was still working at Multiverse. We'd be then getting back home 6:30. So we had all of that. So the pandemic, we were at home together, which was lovely, and you have amazing memories from that. At the same time, it then also, because we couldn't go out, obviously. So if you had any hobbies, if you had anything else that you were doing outside of work, they all stopped because you couldn't go anywhere unless it kind of became online. So in that season, a lot of people would have found that their careers probably accelerated quite fast, because actually you were doing nothing. You had time. And even though my time was kind of compartmentalized because I still had to homeschool and do everything, when I think about those 2 years, it was fine to do meeting after meeting after meeting after this, because I wasn't taking my son football practice. I wasn't taking my daughter to youth. I wasn't taking, because we weren't going anywhere. Whereas now, I cannot work at that same pace anymore because I have other stuff that need me. So in a way, it was hard. I won't lie. It was hard because in 2020, I'd just been promoted into a new role in February. We heard wind of this COVID thing, and we took a decision as a business to take the whole business online before Boris had even said, let's go into lockdown. So we did that. And then we went into lockdown. And you still need to run a business. You still need to, do what you need to do. And we had to pivot the business. And a big part of my role at the time was, running the half part of the delivery function, but still having to recruit lots of people remotely and learn a new role and do all of that stuff. So that's hard anyway. But I find that I, to some extent, thrive in those sorts of environments in terms of, like I said, it's constantly problem solving. I'm constantly having to think of solutions to things. I'm constantly having to be creative, resourceful. I love all of that. But at the same time, my biggest, I don't want to call it regret, but somebody asked me this when I did sort of my leaving thing, what's something that you would do differently? And I said I would have taken care of myself more, because I didn't. I'm taking care of my kids, making sure that they're fine and my family's fine. I'm taking care of my team, making sure that they're fine, making sure the company's fine. Well, I want to take care of me. So that was the biggest thing. And so come 2021, I kind of hit burnout again, because everything that had happened in those 18 months prior, you're just holding it in, keep going. And as we're starting to ease back into normal life again, it's this is too much. So, yeah.
Wow. I think Sope's right. It's easy to pour into other people. It's easy to pour into other people, pour into other situations. Even those people can be kids, because you have to, your mother. It could be your husband, your partner, for example, in a relationship. And you can then just put yourself right at the bottom of that and you just get to the point where when you do realize, sometimes it's like, oh, I'm gone. I'm spent. So you've gone through that. You've gone through pandemic. You've done amazingly at Multiverse. Now you've left. How are you taking care of yourself in your sabbatical then?
That's a great question. Sleep. I don't play with my sleep. I used to be this like 5 a.m. gang. Like, don't need to, no, I sleep. My husband knows very well. Like, I'm like, listen, my babe, I need like 7.5 hours. It's like, it's not negotiable. And it's just because I just see how much that impacts everything else. Like what I eat, how I feel, the energy, all that sort of thing. So sleep is, I've always loved like journaling and being able to do all that sort of thing. And like obviously my quiet time and all that sort of thing, and prayer and reading my Bible. But now I have more space to do that. So there's no rush. Like whereas before, like, okay, 30-minute window to get this all done and then get the kids to school and go. Like now it's sort of like I have the day to do these things. Like I have time to read, look after my health more. So pandemic wise, you sat down in a chair all day. Like when I was director, my day was basically meetings all day, every day. But it's not like, oh, I'm running from this meeting to this meeting room. I'm literally in the same spot and just in meetings all day. So you're not moving, you're not doing any of that. And so that was, for me, a big change of just like getting more movement, having more time to eat better, cook better, that sort of thing. And then just have space to do things. So one of the big transitions when I changed roles a year ago was the space to be more creative again. So to start writing. And that's when I was like, I'm going to start writing on LinkedIn because I really enjoy writing. But I have the headspace to do that now. And that for me is like another creative outlet. That takes care of me. Seeing people takes care of me. I find like I get my cup really full. When I was an entrepreneur, like when I had my business, I had a thing of like every week to be conscious to make sure I'd go and have coffee with somebody. Because again, as an entrepreneur, it can be very lonely and you're by yourself, working from home. So that's something that I'm just like, I just want to make sure I, connect with people because that really helps me. So they're the things. And just asking myself what I need. When you're so busy, you don't even have the space to like hear your body. And like, if you're tired, it's like, yeah, okay, fine, I'm tired, but I've got stuff to finish and do. I'm going to push through. Now it's like, oh, you're tired? Okay, well, just go and have a nap then. You're tired. Go sleep. Or just stop what you're doing, pick it up tomorrow. And that's very not like me. But actually, that's the grace I give myself right now. Because I can.
Do you think, the interesting point you made in there, when you talked about when you were a director, you were back-to-back meetings. Do you think titles are all people think they are? Because a lot of people line up like, I want to become, I don't know, director, VP, all that kind of stuff. As someone who's been there, who's done that, who's experienced it, and obviously you stepped away from it as well. What, I guess, advice or lesson would you say you've learned from having the titles?
I mean, don't get me wrong. There's nothing that took away the pride I felt when I got promoted to director. I won't gonna lie, because I worked very hard to get it, and I was like, yeah. And basically, I remember when I got it, like one of my colleagues was like, "This is a lagging indicator." I was like, "Yeah," because I've been doing it anyway. So there was that. There's also the thing of like I was the most senior Black person at Multiverse. And Ewan said to me at the time, you're the fastest person to go from like coach to director and so on. So there's all of that. I'm very proud. And of course you feel very important. I've got my PA now and all this sort of thing. But innately, you're still the same person. So there's still challenges, battles, things, everything you have that makes you is still there. So when you have your identity coupled to that job title, all somebody needs to do is give you any sort of indication that you're either not doing a good job, or if you just did this, or take it away from you, can destroy your world. So my advice to people is that it's a title. I've read somewhere, I think it was Lovey. She posted something on Instagram of like how all job titles are rented anyway. You're just renting them onto the next person. And when I read that, I was just like, that is so true. And it just made me really like, okay. And it started that journey of me not being defined by my job, not being defined by my level, because I think this is another motivator for me in terms of building my personal brand, because I didn't want to be tied to something because it didn't define, it's one facet of who I am. It's not who I am. And I felt like me being able to share my stories and talk about things that matter to me outside of that sphere was more important. And it allowed me to like define who I wanted to be known as opposed to Chichi the director of delivery. Like, okay, fine, it's a title. When I changed jobs, and it was something that I instigated because I was like, I need something that's just less intense, and I wanted to go down to 4 days a week. And again, the world was opening up again, and I needed to be more available for my family. I had to go through that journey of like decoupling my value from my title, because even though I had like a 4-month runway, so from when I had the conversation, they were like, fine, let's see out the financial year and then change over. When it happened, it was still very much like, am I still valuable in this organization now that I'm not in this role? Am I still important now not have this? Because, you know, in a heartbeat, it's like meetings that you used to have with people no longer your diary anymore. You're no longer in the inner circle anymore. People come and ask you something and they assume you know, and I'm like, I'm not in that world anymore, I don't know. So you're dealing with like FOMO, you're dealing with this, you're dealing with that. And so I had to go through that process of like, I'm not defined by this job and I'm not defined by this title. And the same way I do that with people I work with as a coach, to kind of like, who are you? That's when I had to be like, who am I and who do I want to be? You know, people ask all the time, yeah, it's a process, because you're not defined by your job. You're not your job. You can't be a job. If you are your job, then you put yourself in a very precarious situation where they can control your life, because then, you know, it's that whole thing of if you're worried about what people think, you're basically living in this prison of like, how you're doing, how you're performing, I need to do more, I need to do more, I need to do more. And I was like, I'm not defined by that anymore.
Like I said, it's a journey though. Like, it's so easy to have both of those two things intertwined. I think it's even got worse with people being even more at home now, or those who are working hybrid, where it's like, oh, this is me, and people don't even see what I'm doing. Let me even work really, really hard. And you just get sucked in where all your thoughts are fully consumed with your work, and you can easily forget about who you are, what you are about. It's and I love those examples you gave around some of those feelings, because that's the reality of it. That's the bit I don't think people talk enough about, around those. Am I still good enough? Am I still important? Do people still value me? Because it's good to be in that position. Like, let's be real. It's good to be in those positions. It's good to be in those rooms. It's good to be in the know. But there's a downside to it, and walking away from that is never easy at all.
It's not. And I remember saying to my coach at the time, who was amazing, who helped me navigate all of that. In fact, when I started working with her, I started working with her because I'd just become director, and I was like, I said to multiple of us, I said, I need a coach, and I need somebody who's not in this organization, but I need to work with somebody who has worked in a sort of similar sort of big teams, but is also a mother. So I went and researched and found this great coach. And it's funny, in the course of our time working together, it helped me realize that actually I didn't want to do this job. So even though I'd got to the goal of like, yes, I'm a director, I was like, actually, she asked this really great question, like, if the job was available to apply for it now, would you apply for it? When she asked that question, I was just like, no. So it's just, anyway, so when we had those conversations around this transition piece of like, you know, value and who you are and all that sort of thing, and just like recognizing the feelings, because they are very real. And sometimes you want to ignore them and everything, but it's just acknowledging them. And now even being able to talk about them quite openly, because I get people ask that all the time when they're in a similar sort of circumstance, like how you deal with that. And that's when I was able to sit back and go, okay, what am I good at? What do I enjoy doing? I love developing people. I love supporting other people. You know, we work in a very hybrid organization. I don't really go into the office that much. So how can I stay connected in this organization? And that's when I was like, LinkedIn, right? Everyone's on LinkedIn. I can do all of that. I've always been very strategic around my brand. I get to control that. So how I build relationships, I've always been someone who builds relationships with people. It doesn't matter whether you're the girl in the reception or the president. Like, I will make an effort to, you know, every Monday we'd have our all hands and new people would join, and I might just send them a message on Slack, say, hey, how was your first week? Or whatever, just because that's, you know, I know how it is, and that was my way of like connecting with people. So when I kind of changed roles and I had more time, I was like, okay, what stuff can I do that I want to do, that I enjoy and I have the time to do? And so I created like a employee advocacy program around LinkedIn, and that gave me a chance to teach LinkedIn stuff and do all that with a whole group of people across the organization. I got to build, leadership programs, different things, and pour into people in a way that really matters to me. And when I left, I was sad, of course, but I was also really in awe of them not